Good morning. It is April 13th at 11:32, and this is the Legal and Justice Committee meeting for the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. I'd like to begin with the call to order where we do the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Samiima people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, so the big item on today's agenda is the committee's annual plan. We need to get going on that, and I'm expecting and wanting assistance from everybody. So Jill, could you put up the homework that you sent to everybody?
Sure, give me a moment to do that.
Okay. All righty. So as we don't have Mark helping us, we're going to need everybody's participation. And I was hoping that Eric Ritchie could really help us out with the LEAD program, and that Dave Freeman, along with Stephen Gockley, could assist us with the pretrial services section, and then a conglomeration on the other one. I think, Jill, I was looking for a different one, so give me just a second so I can pull up that attachment. The program updates. So we've got municipal, superior, and district courts, drug court, mental health court, electronic home monitoring. And I was hoping Darlene and Bruce could help out a little more with those areas, and I can try to get some numbers on increases of usage from electronic home detention to see what the difference was before COVID and then after COVID. I'll ask FTS to help us out with some of the statistics there. So I'm opening up to everybody to let me know if there's other items that they think we should be putting on the legal and justice portion. And we also need to talk about goals for the next year. Two items that we were thinking that have been hot topics that we really need to work on, especially post-COVID, would be re-entry and domestic violence offender treatment programs. So anybody want to start off and give me some feedback? I'm looking for hands. It's very quiet. I don't see any. Thank you, Stephen.
First of all, I'll be glad to help on the pretrial stuff. I would head that pretrial processes because it involves both the work on the risk assessment tool and the pretrial services unit. And so pretrial services tends to refer to that unit. And I'll try to loop in John Krause on pretrial services and Judge Garrett on the risk assessment stuff. That work group has a meeting on the 20th next week. So we should have some more to report there, although we've been stymied a little bit for some time for obvious reasons on both of those prongs. Anyway, I'll work on trying to get some draft to you, Raylene, and Arlene on that. The other thing I would add, and I think I brought this up in steering committee, I can't remember how it got handled, but the recovery house for drug court I consider that within our domain at legal and justice, because it's the drug court focus came out of our work. So I don't know where we've ended up putting that report. Jill, do you recall?
I apologize. My attention was elsewhere as I was managing Zoom settings. Can you repeat that, Stephen?
Yeah, where have we located the recovery house topic for reporting purposes? Within legal and justice or within behavioral health?
Actually, I think it was discussed in terms of putting it at the head of everything, with a general overview of the main full task force topics. I don't know that either this committee or the behavioral health committee has actually discussed the recovery house in their work. So I guess I'll leave that up to the chairs of this committee and the behavioral health committee to decide where that should go.
Well, it definitely is part of behavioral health services, but it also applies to diversion, filling out diversion services, which we need very badly. So it is a kind of general advancement. It's like it would be equal in significance to a crisis stabilization system that's been established in terms of new services or improved services.
I think, Arlene, I was referring less to which category or type of service it fell into, as opposed to which committee had actually worked on it and should report on it. And I mean, the health department, of course, with Ann, has done a lot of the programming, but I don't think the behavioral health subcommittee has done anything on that, whereas legal and justice was in at the very outset of the property transfer and all of that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I had forgotten about that.
But I'm fine with Jill's suggestion to have the three of you decide where and who to report on that.
Stephen, is it too late to add that to our meeting where we are with behavioral health to discuss it as a group together?
You mean too late in the timeline for developing the annual report? I don't have that timeline in my head, so I would refer to Jill's much stronger memory skills than mine.
It's
Jill,
nothing in the annual report is locked, so no, it's not too late to add a section where it was handled jointly. Although I wasn't planning for that kind of section in the report, we can certainly work it out one way or another.
the other way to deal with this would be, which would parallel the reality of it. This committee could report on the nearing completion of the construction project, and then the behavioral health subcommittee, mostly via Ann, could report on the engagement of Lifeline services and the anticipated programming structure for the residents of that.
Teamwork.
I like that idea. I think we might want to just run it past the chairs and Ann to make sure they're on board with that. And if we can do that with just an email to see if that works, then I think we can proceed with that option. Arlene.
I just had a question on the homework on the top part of it under pretrial services in municipal district and superior courts. we do not have a specific pretrial unit because all of our pretrial are monitored by probation. And so it just doesn't seem right to label it as a pretrial service unless we somehow acknowledge that the courts are using that through, or at least for municipal court, district court, that they're using that through probation. I don't want to give the impression that we have a separate unit like Superior Court does.
Oops, there we go. I agree with you, Darlene. I think there was just comparisons that we have pretrial monitoring through probation done throughout our committee meetings. And that was kind of one of the reasons the pretrial services unit was suggested that there wasn't monitoring with Superior Court. And now we've got that up and running. So I think just in the headline, we can make sure that we separate courts of limited jurisdictions, that the pretrial monitoring is done through probation, and that the pretrial services unit is a new program established for Superior Court. Does that seem correct?
That'd be great. Yeah, just, as we're trying to look at giving this information to the public, I think the clearer we are, the better.
And go ahead, Stephen.
So maybe for the report, the heading could actually be pretrial diversion. And then we could have Superior Court Pretrial Services Unit, Municipal Court Pretrial Diversion, and Pretrial Risk Assessment in Superior Court, or something like that. We could have subcategories under that.
Yeah, I think we just need to make sure that when we go to the courts of limited jurisdiction, including district court, that it's well established that there's been a pretrial monitoring program through probation for many years, and that the pretrial services unit is a newly established program. And then the setbacks and stuff that you and Dave and Deb Garrett will go through. Hold on one second. Had to go into D&D. So is there any other qualms or questions to make sure that we've got that kind of hammered down?
Is somebody going to follow up then with Eric or Melora, or I don't know where you're going to get the lead report from?
Yeah, I was hoping that Eric was going to be joining us today, but he's not. So I will shoot off an email to them today to see if they can assist us with getting some goals, contacts, progress, and issues and opportunities on that, because I think that is a big portion of progress that we've done this year or in the last year. And then going back to Darlene, I didn't see Bruce in here. Are you able to help us out with the mental health court and FDS on your end from Bellingham?
Sure, we did that presentation just a brief time ago with the numbers for FDS, and then the commissioner is getting ready to present a report to our city council on the mental health court. So maybe we can talk at a different time about what kind of information you're looking for in those two things.
Excellent. I think Arlene and I are going to meet next Wednesday. So if you have some time, maybe we can schedule that after this meeting. I can give you a call and we can set that up.
Sure.
Is there any other issues or items that anybody else on the committee thinks that should be on this report?
So Raylan, I have a question in terms with the lead. So would Eric Ritchie be the best person, or the program manager, Thomas?
I think both of them would be able to work together and help on that. I'm not objecting to anything. I just don't feel that as a chair of this committee, I'm the right person to report on that program. I'm happy to put it together. I just want input from the members that are a little bit closer to that program.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve.
Again, thinking about the report itself, this committee has done a lot of self-education and exploration, bringing in speakers on reentry and some other services. I think it would be useful to capture in the report and for Jack and I to be able to report to county and city councils on that activity, because it does lay some groundwork for possible future emphases that we would take up. So I don't know if there could just be a section on, I don't know even what you'd call it, but something that would capture a lot of the information that you two have developed for committee members.
Yeah, we had very detailed reports from the gentleman who was doing education in the jails, and the fact that there were many people who wanted to take advantage of what he was offering. And the, I think it was the Goodwill program, was it? Yeah. That, and I have no idea if they're continuing to do their re-entry program during this COVID period. That, you know, I don't know if they're doing anything at all.
I had a blurb, I didn't send it out earlier, but that we've adopted in continual education on rapidly a changing environment. I know that's kind of a rough sentence, but I think we could maybe put in another headline for education, committee education, ongoing committee education on existing programs and needed opportunities. So I think that's a great idea to put that in there, and then we can just put on what's been there. But that also kind of brings us into the next steps for what we need to be looking for our committee for the future. And reentry was on there, and I think that's where Arlene just mentioned, you know, what are they doing? What aren't they doing? What are we going to be able to do post-COVID, and how long before we can assist these people? I also think we need to look at how many people are going to be re-entering, and what is our volume going to be if the Blake decision remains the same. So I think those are all important things that we need to keep in mind. The other one that we've had on our agendas, but we really haven't had a lot of reports back, is the domestic violence offender treatment program. Mandatory treatment is required for DV charges with convictions, and there was funds available that we supported as a task force as a whole, and then the program didn't go through as originally determined, and then the money went to district court, and they actually allocated that out, and I think Bellingham was part of that. And Arlene, I think your hand's up, so I'm going to let you go because you can probably talk about that a little better than I can.
Sure, I can just tell you what I know is the city has allocated money and the county has allocated money for this program. With budget cuts, it was cut to 20,000 per each. So the city gave 20,000 and the county gave 20,000 for this year and for next year. So that significantly limits the program, because one person's program can be anything from, you know, between $1,700 to about $4,000 for a full treatment program. And when we onboard someone, we want to make sure that we have the money so that they can completely finish the program. We don't want to get a bunch of people and then not be able to continue paying for people that have already started. But we did start, I believe it was November in Bellingham with bringing on defendants. And I believe district, I think we started about the same time. And what we're really finding is it takes quite a while once somebody is ordered to get evaluation and find out what their treatment program is. It's taking months to get the evaluation and then to know what their treatment program is. And of course, this is for indigent defendants, those that cannot pay. And right now there are 2 providers that have entered the program. And let's see. That's what I know to date. So I don't know how helpful that is. Bruce, of course, they are the umbrella organization. Probation supervises those that are on that program. And then they are tracking progress as well as the city.
Darlene, how did it get shifted from 250,000 to 20,000 per? Who, the city's made that decision? Who made that decision?
The city and the county, due to budget cuts. Bruce and I fought to keep the programs. And we felt that even if the amount had to be reduced, it was important to keep the program so that when, after the pandemic and things get back to normal, hopefully we can increase the funding. But both of us were at the point where the programs could have been just completely gone because of how the financing is. And so that was our strategy. Let's at least keep something so we can progress. And then the other thing is, by progressing, even if it's on a smaller scale, we can present to the city or the county success, how it's working when we're able to help indigent defendants get through the treatment process.
Do you happen to know who the providers are?
It's Waterfront Counseling. And then the other one is Andrea Grant. Hang on just a minute. I can grab something that has the name of her organization. I don't have it right here. Just a sec.
Okay.
Stephen, I see your hand up, but if we can give Darlene just a second to see if she has it, and then you can go.
I'm sorry. I have it right here. It's Relationship Resources. That's the program that Andrea Grant has.
Thank
And
you.
so as of now, those are the 2 that I know that are able to have clients on that program that are qualified to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a little confused by Darlene's report because back a while, it was DV SAS coming to us when Karen Burke was there, talking about real changes in the state certification requirements. None of our programs, which people already were not very satisfied with, met those requirements, and they were going to pilot a whole new treatment approach. I know that didn't work out, at least with DV SAS. But what Darlene's describing is sort of the old system. Maybe that's all we still have. But I thought the question was, what's become of the new standards, which were intended to be more effective? And I hate to put her on the spot, but I know Moonwater is on the DV commission, and I'm wondering whether whether you have any knowledge on that track of a more enhanced, more effective program development pathway.
Stephen, I can address that as well, but Moonwater, if you want to go ahead, I can add to the whatever.
Oh, by all means, Darlene, I have limited information to offer. So if you'd like to weigh in, I'll add if there's anything else I can add.
Well, I can tell you that the standards were approved and they are new. And to be a part of this program, you have to comply with those standards. Don Stahl from Waterfront got himself certified in this and is now qualified under that program. Violence Intervention Professionals, who was our other resource, is no longer available. Andrea is certified under those new standards. I know we put out all over the state that we were going to be offering help with indigent offender treatment, but no one has come forward. We were hoping that maybe another agency would maybe consider this as part of their program. It's really hard to function if you just have this as part of what you offer, but we just haven't had anyone come forward. And so that's why we only have the two agencies. And DVSAS, I'm also on the commission. My understanding is with the transitions and losing the director, not being able to get it together for a bid for this process, because they had developed their own treatment plan that kind of fell through and wasn't able to be implemented. That's just kind of where we're at. I don't know if that's helpful, or Moonwater, you have anything else to add?
No, just acknowledging the transition that their agency was going through, and then the commission also went through some leadership transition. So I think it would be worthwhile for us to loop back just to check to see if the agency or the commission has any specific plans in moving that concept forward. But I haven't heard that it's being actively explored, but I don't know intimately.
Could I suggest that that whole area might be worth an educational piece for the committee as well? I just saw a newspaper article where Susan Marks was identified as the ED of the state association rather than the DV commission. And so I don't know who replaced Karen at DV SAS. I don't know where the commission stands with its staffing and programming.
So what I'm hearing is that this is definitely a next step for the Legal and Justice Committee, that we need to be doing some resource searching and educating ourselves on what's out there. What I know from just our court is, I can concur with Darlene that it is taking a long time for people to get their treatment, to get their evaluations. And I don't know that the small cities are on board with any of the funding. I think 2021 that we're not getting that funding for the indigent. So it's also a problem for some of the defendants that we have to be able to afford to get the mandated treatment that they need. And only having two individuals that are licensed and approved is also a concern, because that makes it really hard for everybody to get what needs to be done. Two people can't do it for the whole county. At least that's my personal opinion. So Darlene, you got your hand up and I'll let you go.
I just was going to say that I know at one time we had Bruce and Jake Weebush, who is the lead probation officer, to do a presentation for us. I don't know what happened with that, but they really would be the ones, I think, that at this point would have a lot of information for us.
Who is that again? Say that again.
Sorry, that's Bruce Van Glupt, the Director of District Court and Probation, and then Jake Weebush, who is over probation.
And Darlene, you're absolutely correct. We did have both of them on the agenda to speak on this topic. Unfortunately, with everything else going on, they didn't have time to put together all the information. So we need to bring that back up and have a topic on that. And then also Moonwater, I saw your hand up. So go ahead, Moonwater.
I was just going to say I'd be happy to reach out to DVSAS and the commission. Both have new leadership, and just inquire as to whether or not there's any active plans to pick that ball back up, and can report back on that.
That would be excellent. I think, we have our group meeting with behavioral health in May. So maybe this is something that we can look at putting onto our June agenda, and also putting it to the report, which is kind of where we're talking, or what we're talking about. So go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in Bruce and Jake's report. I recall they were with us before, but part of the prior DVSAS initiative to form its own treatment program was an acknowledgement that the capacity was woefully inadequate back when we had 2 providers, one of whom isn't there anymore. So now we still have 2 providers. The capacity, just by this discussion, is still woefully inadequate. So I'd suggest the committee in its inquiry go beyond Bruce and Jake to, as Moonwater is suggesting, touch base with the program and the service providers to see whether there are any opportunities or any interest in expanding capacity in the community, because it's obvious how much we need it. And this is an issue that's come up in pretrial risk assessment as well, is what do you do with DV offenders in terms of pretrial release, and that's a special risk assessment factor.
So, I'll take that on and do some phone calls to people currently involved to find out, what is happening and what ideas they have about what's needed.
Thank you, Arlene. I think we also want to include Carol Donovan in this discussion, as she's the Small Cities Domestic Violence Victims Coordinator for us. And I think she would be a good resource to help us gather that information as well. So I can get you her contact information, let her know that.
Right. It's a very difficult kind of counseling process, and really highly specialized training to work with the perpetrators especially.
I agree. Also, so we had DV on for the next steps for the annual report, and then we also had re-entry as something we wanted to talk about. Is there any other agenda items or items that you guys think we should be looking at for this year?
Jill here. Eric Ritchie has his hand raised.
Oh, yay. Eric, you're there. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been here the whole time. I was on a telephone. I had some problems with my Zoom for some reason, so I had been listening. But and actually, I was a little bit late. We've been involved in a murder investigation that's going full steam ahead. A lot of action right now. But I want to talk to you. I want to understand more about what our plan is as far as this report. I mean, I want to understand who we're talking to, and how much time we're going to be needing to speak and things like that. Somebody can give me an overview of what this report's about and who we're speaking to. That'd be helpful.
So I think we can have Jill send out a copy of the last full annual report. It's also in the Whatcom County's website as well, just so you kind of see what the last report looked like. And it goes to everybody. And Jill, can you give us a timeline and a little bit more of a refresher than what I'm at?
Sure. The enabling ordinance for the task force requires annual reports to the county council and county executive. What we've done in the past is produce those reports. They're due June 30th of each year. And typically what happens is we do up a written report, and then the task force chairs will present the report and talk about a few things in that report and what the task force in general has been doing at a county council meeting. And I believe, Stephen, you can confirm you guys have presented this to Bellingham City Council as well.
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
And the idea, Eric, is that we both recap the work that the task force and its subunits have done in the past year and point to some target areas, some opportunities, some obstacles that we envision for the coming year, just so they can see the overall flow of the task force's work.
Okay, so this is going to be for us. It's a written report that, and you provide an oral report to the county council and city council.
That's correct. And the written report is on the website, available to the public.
That's all I needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So will you be able to assist us in your team on giving us the information on the on the LEAD program?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
If anyone has any content that they'd like to contribute to these reports on your programs, if you could get that to me. I'm asking for a draft by the end of this month. April 30th would be great. Thank you.
Sorry, I was writing notes. Going back to the next steps, I haven't heard anything more than re-entry and domestic violence. Anybody else want to put their hand up, please? Okay, well, that's definitely some food for thought. Oh, yay, Stephen.
I just wanted to, are you asking, Raylene, for future focuses? Is that what you were asking?
Exactly. Future focuses for the Legal and Justice Committee. And that is a topic on our annual report.
So my guess is that the pretrial processes work group may come back to the subcommittee either for some approval or endorsement or guidance. I'm not sure of work that the pretrial processes unit is doing. Which means I think that maybe ought to be on there also.
Excellent. Also, I was thinking that, we did have people come in from the mental health portion from the law enforcement side. I know Geraldine Clicks has now been added, and Jamie, I'm trying to remember his last name, but the deputy that just recently, I believe he was retiring. And then there was Bellingham had their 2 officers. I think that might be something we want to see how that's going, if they're looking at adding more, how that's changing. Ma'am Moonwater, it looks like you have your hand raised, so go for it.
I was just going to suggest that we keep the concept of restorative justice alive within this group and on this task list. And I think that development of certain programs or services or practices could be integrated under the heading of reentry, but I also think as a standalone concept, we should keep it alive.
That's a really good suggestion. Thank you. Because it has to do with the philosophy underlying the changes. And that really matters for everyone to understand that. We're not just changing things to change things,
Right. If anybody else has anything they want to add or input for the annual report, please make sure you get that to Jill and me and Arlene as well, as we're going to meet next week to try to get something put together in writing. So we would like any of that input. The other item on the agenda is identifying items for the May joint behavioral health meeting. And we do have re-entry on that. And then I wanted the behavioral health crisis response program was something that they've been discussing. And I think that the Legal and Justice Committee needs to have input on that. And so I wanted to get feedback from any and all of you on what your thoughts are on that program and anything else that you think we should have on our agenda for the next meeting.
I'm wondering who has knowledge about what's going into the program. It sounded to me like that it's information that Anna's working on the program and trying to get things included that haven't been included. At a meeting, can't talk right now.
I think Doug Chadwick might be able to answer some of our questions, and he's got his hand raised because I think he's been somewhat involved in that. So please go ahead, Doug.
Sure. I have been sitting in on the behavioral health subcommittee meetings, and there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about crisis response to mental health, both law enforcement and an unarmed response. So there's been some discussions about different pilot programs and what that may look like. I think some of the thoughts as far as a response within the city limits of Bellingham and what that may look like in rural parts of Whatcom County are different. So I think the direction that everybody's headed is maybe doing some type of pilot in the city limits of Bellingham, and then seeing if that can be replicated in other parts of the county. I think right now they're working on pairing up mental health professionals with either Bellingham's behavioral health officers or our mental health deputies, and seeing, trying to pull together some statistics and what type of calls maybe dispatched to an unarmed response. So I think, like I said, at the joint meeting here next month, I think that would be a good time to have that discussion.
Thank you. Are there any concerns that you have about the program?
Obviously, you know, and we've brought it up before. One of the thoughts is, what's the decision tree to when do you send law enforcement, when do you send medical personnel, and when do you send mental health professionals by themselves? And that's a hard decision because dispatchers rely on the information that's provided to them, and it's not always accurate, and it's not always they're not always provided all the information, and it doesn't matter what type of call we go to, you can never trust that the information you're getting is when you arrive on scene, that's what the situation is going to be. So it's really predicated on asking good questions and getting very detailed information. And quite frankly, sometimes the callers that are making that 911 call don't have all the information. So that's the concern, especially if you're going to send that type of response to far reaches of Whatcom County. And if they do need some assistance that requires a law enforcement response, that response may be a ways away. And I give the example, if you send this type of team out to maybe Glacier or, you know, far reaches of Whatcom County, and they get themselves in a situation where they need things have gotten escalated and there's safety concerns. So that's you know, at the end of the day, it really comes down to the safety of everyone involved, the people that need the services and the people that are responding. So we'll continue to evaluate. And again, we're I think for the sheriff's office, having mental health professionals ride with our deputies basically puts all those people on scene at the same time, and then you can kind of triage and decide who's best to step forward and handle that call. But there again, maybe types of calls where, you know, right now it's basically by referral. We show up and we triage and determine that this really isn't a law enforcement call, and then we call whether it's Compass Health, their MCOT, or other resources, have them show up on scene. But there is a delay, as opposed to if you have them basically a co-responder team, you have everybody on scene at the same time, and then you can decide who's most appropriate to take lead on that.
Doug, Chief Dahl said that 80% of the calls have a mental health component to them. So what that suggests to me is that the mental health piece is crucial for all calls.
Oh, absolutely. And again, there's a high number of those calls do have a mental health or a substance use component. But again, we have to make sure that the scene's safe before we can address some of those other issues. And that's really from a law enforcement perspective is what our concern is, and is that all people responding. And I know there's a lot of discussions about it's a either or. I think really at the end of the day, it's an and. We still have to have the law enforcement response, but we also need people that are out there responding to address the root cause, mental health and substance use disorders.
I mean, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure if this is part of the conversation or part of the agenda, but this is really interesting to me. Doug, it sounds like you studied this a fair amount, and I'm just kind of curious if there are problems in other cities where these kinds of co-responder plans are taking effect, if there are issues where people who respond are not safe when they send let's say a mental health response instead of a police response. Are there other issues? I don't know. I'm really curious.
Again, I know what we experience here. I know they've looked at, the CAHOOTS program out of Eugene, the STAR program out of Denver. And a lot of times they talk about how they were able, I've seen some recent articles and they were talking, kind of highlighting the program about how they were able to send an unarmed response. What they didn't cite was law enforcement actually showed up on scene first, kind of triage that and then called that resource there. It does allow law enforcement to leave the scene and respond to other calls for service, which is a good thing, and get people connected to the right services. But again, I think a lot of those is you're not going to know until you're actually on scene if you don't need law enforcement or not. So I see those co-responder models where you've got medics and mental health professionals. There's a couple examples of that around the country that seem to be fairly successful. I've also seen others that have law enforcement, fire, EMS, and mental health professionals all in a team that moves around together. So there's multiple options. So I know they're looking at all of those.
Has anybody seen any studies about how things are reported to 911 and then what things actually look like when officers arrive? I mean, I'll tell you, I've watched, I've listened to a number of 911 calls, and then, I know that my cases end up being quite a bit different. I'm just kind of curious if there have been any studies that, might demonstrate that.
Dispatch may have some of those. I can tell you just from, 27 years of law enforcement, what you're dispatched to and what the call evolves to are many times very different. So you have to be prepared to handle what, you use the tools you have and whatever training you have to really triage and de-escalate things and determine what the right resources and services are.
To change this, it seems to me you have to have teamwork between dispatch, law enforcement, and mental health counselors. And in the planning process and the training process, many will have to be retrained for what you're calling the decision tree. Who's in charge and what steps do we take? So the team planning seems really crucial, which is what you're involved in, right, Doug?
Correct. And again, it's sometimes it gets confusing. I think there's 3 different committees I sit on that all talk about similar things. And then, we've got the LEAD program and other programs out there. So there's a lot of things that law enforcement is doing in conjunction with mental health and substance use professionals to try and decide what those services are most appropriate. But you're right. It really comes down to working as a team. All the resources we're talking about exist in Whatcom County. It's just, I think everybody's trying to figure out how to streamline that and do it more efficiently. But all the pieces are there.
I mean, Chief Tanksley, do you have any comments on this? I'd be curious to know your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I know the model for this was from Oregon, the organization Cahoots. So, perhaps that and they've been doing this, I don't know, 25 plus years. So perhaps maybe there's some empirical data that one has studied either from the University of Oregon or Oregon State or even Portland State University may have studied that program. But locally, I know the city of Mount Vernon had a person with their department of social worker therapists on a grant program for about 3 or 4 years. So I'm curious, just locally, if we have any data that could take a look at what Eric mentioned. So that's all I have for now. But I think I do second what Under Sheriff Chadwick said with regard to the way that a call is dispatched and information that is received in dispatch. One is, can be changed rapidly and it's an evolving situation. But two, the information oftentimes that people give, they're given information under duress, so, that information does change. So that's all I have at this point.
Thank you, Chief Tanksley. And Stephen, you've been waiting very patiently.
I'm not privy to all of these conversations, but I am aware that the principal concern does come out of the sheriff's office around this response time out in the county issue and the safety problems that potentially raises. So I think that's why the pathway right now is to pilot something in the city of Bellingham where the response time is a little less an issue. But I do want to emphasize one thread of this that I think we're losing a little bit in this conversation, at least, is there's a tension here between that safety and response time issue and the fact that we're really, in part, responding to a fairly forceful community voice in favor of unarmed responses. So when you pair mental health professionals with law enforcement responses, you are not having an unarmed response. And there's a significant segment of the community that does not feel safe when law enforcement shows up. And whether or not that's well-grounded locally, that's a pretty reasonable fear in certain parts of the community. So I think we're wrestling with the disconnect there between those two urges out in the community. And I don't know how we combine those two. But I think that's part of why we're trying to experiment here. The second thing I will say is, and I'll just go back to one of the principles in our ordinance as a task force, we're charged with coming up with evidence-based or best practice recommendations for this. So I think whatever we formulate on this needs to have that piece to it. We're piloting something, we're experimenting with something. And once again, the data will be a key component of this. So I think if this ends up being a pilot in Bellingham, we need to make darn sure that we are tracking the response time if law enforcement has to be called, secondary to an unarmed response. So we know what percentage of the cases actually were misevaluated, and we can extrapolate that out into the county. We need to do our own validation and study of this. So I with all due respect to Doug, I don't think anecdotal recollections of 911 dispatch is a sound methodological basis for making program decisions. That may be a piece of it, but we need to figure out that we're actually doing this with some validity and some reliability. And lastly, we started talking about this on a question of who should actually inform us about this. And yes, I think Ann and Doug and other representatives of the sheriff's office would be key parts of this. But the other piece of this is at least city council. I know Dan Hamill, both in his behavioral health co-chair and his city council position, has been very active and done a lot of research and connecting with cahoots and so forth. So I think if we get reports or we continue our self-education about this, Dan would be an important person to have in the conversation as well.
Stephen, I agree with you that this is something that we need to bring up more information and have more players in it. But I also wanted to make sure that if this is a topic at our next combined meeting of behavioral health, that we're starting to think about it. And, you know, I know there's a lot of positive feedback from the community that this is something that they want to move forward with. But I also think we really do have to think of what other issues are out there. And so that's kind of why I wanted to make sure this committee was thinking about it, talking about it, and concerns. I also think it'd be interesting to get statistics from social services where individuals are already going out to the public, removing children, bringing children back to homes that are volatile situations, statistics on their concerns for safety, because that's not part of this program in response. But there was an issue not too long ago. I believe a CPS worker was going back to get children or bring children back, something. And I don't remember all the specifics on the case, but I just remember the guy shot the social worker and the kids were involved. And, you know, so there's an element of safety that I don't think we can forget about. And we really have to make sure that's strong when we're bringing it. And I think everybody is concerned about that. I did see Eric Ritchie has his hand up, and also Flo Simon was in here. I didn't know if she had any comments or not, but please go forward, Eric.
Yeah, so, you know, I think Doug brought up some really good points about this, about how it's, you know, it might be more difficult within the county. And you know, I don't know if this program has been duplicated in such a vast area as Whatcom County. And, you know, it might be a real issue. I'm kind of wondering if it makes some sense to have somebody from Cahoots or the STAR program in Denver to come speak to us all. I mean, I know that Dan Hamill's been working in this area. I know that he's probably has a lot to say, maybe even some expertise built at this point. But, you know, I'd like to hear it straight from the horse's mouth if we could. You know, a decent representative from one of those two programs to come in here and tell us what it's like and you know what some of the pitfalls might be. I mean, for all I know, Doug's absolutely right. I mean, it does sound pretty scary to send out a mental health team way out in the county, not really knowing what they're getting into, because you know, I don't think it's been quite said, but sometimes people who are reporting things on 911, you know, they're under the influence. It's more than just duress. It's they don't understand what's going on and what kind of dangers are facing them. So you know, I would like to hear from somebody who's, you know, got some experience in this area.
It seems to me that really good therapists are masters at handling emotional situations, it does come up in session when you're working with people. And they're highly trained to handle a situation, to not provoke it. And they will withdraw if it's necessary. And that's not as likely with law enforcement.
Yeah, but Arlene, it's not just about withdrawing. It's about, you know, protecting the person who might be otherwise in danger and, you know, out there at the scene who maybe called 911. So while, you know, a trained mental health person understands you need to walk away, you know, we might be leaving somebody else out there to die.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I'll just say, if I could just jump in, I think City Council has had representatives from Cahoots and also Denver, and you should be able, I don't know if it was that or the Behavioral Health Subcommittee of the task force, but I know people have spoken to us as a community from there. I talked to Dan about trying to get a Cahoots person back to speak to the task force, and he said they are the topic du jour nationally. They are deluged with requests and they don't even answer their phones anymore for this. So he was very discouraging about that. But I think there are presentations available to us. Maybe Jill knows where they are, that we can listen to them describe their programs, and some of us engaging in Q&A with them. So that might be one place to start.
I believe both Cahoots and the STAR program presented to city council. So I'm sure you can get video recordings of that. And again, going back to, I agree, you need to look at the actual statistics, and that's why, based on the discussions, it looks like the pilot program will likely happen in Bellingham. One, just because of the safety concerns we brought forward. And again, I think that response in Bellingham and out in rural parts of Whatcom County looks different. And we may have to structure that different, but that doesn't mean that we can't still push resources to other parts of the county outside the city limits of Bellingham. But I think to get those numbers and ensure what we can do to mitigate any safety concerns, it should start in the city limits of Bellingham, and we'll go from there.
Raylene, Jill here. I'm going to step in. Perry Mowry's had his hand raised.
Thank you. I've been trying to get there. He's been very patient. Go ahead.
You're doing a great job, Raylene. Yeah, just a couple of comments. I would agree with a number of the things that have been said. And although I haven't been intimately involved with it, the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Expansion Group has definitely had many of the pieces of conversation that are going on here, including the gathering of data and compiling some of that information. So I think that'd be a really important topic to consider for the behavioral health component of the Justice and Legal meeting. Also some other topics. I don't want to drag us off of necessarily this one, but consideration for Crisis Stabilization Center, the involuntary admission certification that Compass Health is pursuing, that very much will lead into also law enforcement EMS drop-off and kind of those components. So I just wanted to toss a couple of those things in there that might be consideration for that next meeting. Sorry, I should have mentioned that I just stepped in for Jackie Mitchell. She's got the day off and said, would you cover? And it's like, sure, I'll listen.
Thank you, Perry. I appreciate that. And I agree that we need to add that involuntary admissions on there. Any other comments on that?
That's an important piece. It's really, really vital. And I don't know how far along Anne is in that process. Do you?
As far as the process, Arlene, do you mean in terms of behavioral health
Yeah.
expansion group?
Involuntary care.
It was actually, as Compass Health came in as a provider in the Crisis Stabilization Center, I actually drafted the lease agreement and put into that contingent memo of understanding that they would indeed actively pursue the involuntary treatment certification. This is something that they're actively pursuing at this point. I don't actually have an update on that super recently, but they are actively pursuing it. And also, I know that they have developed a staffing model that would be necessary in relation to that. And then it gets connected to a whole lot of other things, the financing, the funding for operations and some of those kinds of components. But I think it's very realistic, and I think that the steps are moving forward. Sorry to say that I don't have an ETA on that, but I've been in communication with Compass pretty regularly about the steps that they're taking relative to completing that certification. This is the related to law enforcement drop-off, as opposed to the ITAs that are for extended periods of time. Although designated crisis responders can complete an intake at that point and make determinations in terms of involuntary treatment admit, the person would need to be transported from there because the Crisis Stabilization Center wasn't developed, nor is it staffed or designed for long-term involuntary treatment.
Yes, this is a missing piece to our care system in the Northwest. People have to be shipped out to other parts of the state, which is not the best for us.
Thank you, everybody, for your comments on that. And if anybody else has any other more comments on, I'm sorry, my brain just stopped. I was going to ask Chief Tanksley if he actually had any contacts in Portland that might be able to help us with statistics or law enforcement perspective of the Cahoots program, as he was there for a while. However, I think Chief Tanksley has disappeared, so maybe I'll touch base with him later and see if he has any contact information that might be able to help us. And if anybody else has statistics or information that we should have at the next joint meeting, I definitely want that to be presented. Is there anybody else that has any other items that you think we need to have on the next behavioral health joint meeting? Alrighty, I'm not seeing any hands on that, but we do have other business, and the steering committee and the incarceration task force, sorry, I keep moving, I have to, needs to discuss on how we're going to do our communication strategy, getting what we have done, what we want to do, things that other than just the annual report. They've talked about social media, they've talked about other options, and just looking for feedback from the Legal and Justice Committee on how you think we should proceed for communications. And Stephen, if you would jump in and help me out, give a more clearer understanding of what our options are for communications at this time and what we've been discussing.
Boy, that's a big question. I'm not sure I really have the answer to that, Raylene. Jill, I know we've discussed this a couple times in steering. Can you summarize those for us?
Yes, I can give you a little bit of information. Where it left off with steering committee, gosh, was that last week? Ann Deacon told us that the county is developing an open RFQ process for communications experts to apply and be on an open list of people that we can hire for communications consulting, that kind of thing, without having to go out specifically for contract. So that will be a handy resource. Anne asked us to think of anyone we might know of who would be helpful and who could apply to be on that open list of contractors for the county. If you know of anyone who can do that work, please let me know and I can pass that information along. The steering committee also discussed, I think their next step is to come up with some qualifications, a job description, a scope of work that would be relevant and specific to the task force and what it's looking for in terms of communications with the public in general. So that work will be going on kind of behind the scenes to draft something there for the steering committee. I think one of the suggestions, and I can't remember who suggested this, one of the suggestions was for each committee to put together a list of partners in the community who might be specifically interested in the work of the task force that we could outreach to. So if you have particular partners or agencies or other folks in the community that you think would benefit from hearing a little bit more from and about the task force, that would be a great list, I think, for this committee to compile. You can email me any ideas you have in that respect as well. And I think that's about where we're at with that.
Thank you, Jill. Is there anybody that has any? Oh, Moonwater, go for it.
I'm just really glad that some action is being taken to invest in some resources to support communication around activities that the task force has undertaken. I'm recalling that in the very beginning of the formation of the task force, this was a topic of conversation of how do we share information with the community. And I think it's been a struggle and maybe perhaps not as high of a priority as it could have been or should have been over the past couple of years. So I'm really pleased that there's some very intentional activity now happening. And I think the model of having some qualified communications support, helping to message key focus areas and activity, and then pushing that out to partner agencies. One thing I'll share from my experience, when content is developed and disseminated to partner agencies, it's a lot easier than for each of us as partner agencies to be able to push that out on our own social media platforms. So I'm hoping that's it sounds like is what is in development, is having someone come on board to develop content and then be able to disseminate that to a network and have the network be able to further disseminate it. Because I think having the transparency and communication throughout the county will be helpful to the entire county, in addition to the task force, as we work towards raising more awareness on the action that the task force is taking, recommendations that we're making, and activities that all of the agencies in this network are involved in. So I'm very excited and pleased that that's underway.
That's great feedback, Moonwater. Thank you so much. We can certainly incorporate that into a scope of work that we develop. I will say, just so you know, that communications is a bigger issue beyond the task force. A lot of the boards and commissions are having the same issues and questions and desire for some kind of communication support. So the county council at its last meeting did approve a resolution to put together an ad hoc committee, and that is still undefined, but an ad hoc committee to look into how the county can better communicate the work of all of its boards and commissions. So it's definitely on the radar of the council and quite a few other folks as well.
Great.
Thank you, Jill and Moonwater. I know something that I just thought of is that I really enjoy reading Doug Dahl's reports from the Whatcom County Traffic Safety Commission. People submit questions to the Bellingham Herald, and then he responds back on what things can be done and what things can't be done. And, you know, I don't know if you guys think it's a good topic, but, you know, if we had that option, because I know at the last steering committee, it was brought up that some things are more of a hot topic at specific times than other times, and that's usually when the committee is more interested. So getting the community to ask the questions and then responding back with what the task force has done or what we can do in the future might be an option.
Because you're looking for ways to interest the public in wanting to know even about the things we're doing. I really think that the public would be fascinated by the programs like LEAD and GRACE if they really understood what was occurring, and if it was explained to them in normal, simple English language, not our professional jargons, which people turn off to and don't want to read. But the communication specialists are really good at, as you were saying, focusing the points that you really want to make and grab the public interest. All of what we're doing is so important, but people need to know about it in order to understand what's going on.
Raylene, I'm not familiar with the information that you just talked about, can you send me a link or some kind of information I can take a look at that format?
Be happy to. It looks like Eric's had his hand up, so go ahead, Eric.
Just real briefly, LEAD hired Jennifer Mason to be a communications specialist for our program and did a real nice job putting together a program. We have a handout that was developed, plus a number of programs presented to people. Feel like it was money well spent. Just going to leave it there.
Eric, maybe I can connect with you after the meeting. I'm wondering if she might be a good person to include on our ad hoc committee once we get that up and going.
I think she'd be willing and able.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Is there any other business or any other comments on what we were just discussing? I see no hands. Do we have anybody in the public that wants to comment?
We have one attendee at the meeting today. If you would like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand at this time by pressing the raised hand icon on your computer. And there is no raised hand. If I could also just say right quick, if Stephen, Raylene, and Arlene can stay behind after adjourning, if you have a few minutes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I don't see any other hands. I think we're done. So we're going to adjourn a few minutes early. I know you're all terribly disappointed. So thank you all for participation. Make sure that you submit anything that you think we need for that annual report as soon as possible. And we are adjourned. It's 12:48 on April 13th. Thank you, everybody.